We started the story with Sacha running excitedly towards his friend Jace, while holding in his hands a large open book, showing his newly received blessing. With a huge smile, she hugged him tightly and proudly told him that her blessing was a master of the sword. At this, he was very happy for her, and congratulated her very enthusiastically to Sacha. Soon after, Sacha reminded Jace that now it was his turn to receive his own blessing. Then with a determined look, Jace confidently replied that he too would receive an incredible blessing. He added that after that, the two could go on adventures together. In response, Sacha smiled hopefully, and stated that they would be one step closer to fulfilling their dream. He nodded firmly, saying at last. Then, in a memory from the past, the two met in front of their parents' graves, in the rain, in silence, and with sadness in their eyes. At that moment, Jace called Sacha and his deceased parents, and with tears running down his face, he promised that they would form the best and strongest team, and that they would help many people. He declared that they would do it so that no one else would have to go through what they had lived through. Later, in the main hall, an older man announced that it was Jace's turn, and it was explained to us that in that world, all people passed the test and received their blessings when they turned 12. These blessings were powers granted by God to humans. Since Sacha had already received his, it was now Jace's turn to find out which one would be his. To do this, he had to consult the Tome of the Blessings, a sacred book that revealed the abilities that each blessing conferred. With a racing heart and a clear goal in mind, Jace opened the book, and the pages began to move on their own, searching for the name of his blessing. Suddenly, something flashed before him, and a page stood out. When he touched it with his hand, he then saw the name of his blessing, Master of Arms. She got confused by the title and whispered without fully understanding, wondering what that is. Worried, he called the old man named Gist to ask what that blessing meant, but Gist didn't know either. When Sacha read the name, he thought it was strange, and asked if he was really a weapons master. Everyone present was surprised and confused. As they were trying to figure out what that blessing meant, Gist commented that since no one knew what he was doing, maybe Jace wouldn't be able to use it. Faced with the lack of answers, Jace remained silent, trying to understand what would come next. 2 years had passed since the day he received his blessing. In the present, he was walking breathlessly along a mountain path, carrying a huge backpack. He was accompanied by other members of the group, but it was obvious that he was having a hard time keeping up. Sweaty and tired, he kept moving forward with effort. Reynold, their group leader and someone older and more experienced, noticed Jace's effort and asked if he was holding up well. Jace quickly replied that he was fine and that he could still continue. Reynolds smiled and remarked that they were almost at their destination. Meanwhile, a warrior from the team was watching the conversation, and Reynolds closed his comment with an understanding. For his part, Sacha, now the leader of the sacred group, ordered a 30-minute pause. Jace confirmed the order and tried to be helpful, but Sacha firmly interrupted him, telling him that if he passed out there, no one would be able to protect him. He explained that if someone had to carry their luggage, the group would be left vulnerable. At the same time, Robin, another member of the team, offered to help load some things. He tried to cheer Jace up, but Piazzolla, with a mocking smile, mocked him, saying that he could not even use his own blessing, and was already trying to show off. Tycoon, another member, just observed the situation silently. Then, Sacha spoke with authority, explaining that the mission they were carrying out was very important for the classification of the sacred group, and that any mistake could put the team's evaluation at risk. Robin agreed, although he added that he still wanted to help. Jace thanked Robin with a kind smile, saying that at least he could do that. However, Sacha insisted that he should rest and not overload himself. While resting, Jace reflected on his situation. It had been 2 years since he received his blessing, but to this day he had not managed to use it. Despite that, he had formed a group with Sacha, and over time other members had joined. Sacha was now ranked as an individual ranked adventurer, while the sacred group was ranked B among the teams. Jace, on the other hand, saw himself as nothing more than a charger, unable to fight or use his own blessing. While the others stood out, he felt that he was just in the way. Despite his heavy thoughts, Reynolds approached him and encouraged him not to get discouraged, placing his hand on his shoulder in a supportive gesture. Jace thanked him, but continued to clench his fists silently, hiding his frustration inside. During a more private conversation, Reynolds called Sacha and asked how Jace was doing. Reynold noticed that the boy seemed very exhausted, but still believed that they would manage to complete the mission smoothly. So he asked if they had already decided what to do. Sacha, with a serious and worried expression, replied that yes, they had already made a decision. Meanwhile, at the entrance of a dark cave, Jace looked up, startled to realize that they were in front of the lair of the Snake Queen, an Arank monster. He wondered if they were really going to confront her. Sacha then gathered the group together and explained the battle plan. He said she would go in first and confront the creature directly. Tycoon and Robin would provide support in combat, while Reynold would protect the rear. Piazzolla as a healer, he would be safe in the back. Jace tried to participate and asked what he would do, but Sacha was direct and told him to wait outside. Although he was disappointed, Jace just clenched his fists and accepted the silence. Tycoon began to prepare a support spell, and the narrator explained that his blessing was wise, which allowed him to use various types of magic, especially support and healing spells. With everyone in position, Sacha gave the order firmly, saying that it was time to leave. The group headed to the cave, prepared to face the enemy. Soon, a huge snake emerged from the darkness, making the ground shake. She was the Snake Queen, a giant monster with thick scales and fierce eyes. Sacha took the lead without hesitation. With his sword in hand, he advanced decisively, saying coldly that the enemy would have to die right there. Jace, watching from afar, was again impressed by her friend's skill. Although he had seen her before, he still marveled at her strength. The narration then explained that Sacha's blessing, called Sword Master, made her incredibly skilled whenever she wielded a sword. This blessing increased her strength and technique, allowing her to completely dominate the battlefield, making her a truly elite warrior. The battle against the Snake Queen began with Sacha leading the advance. He moved with extreme precision, channeling magical power to strengthen his sword and shield. This was one of the most impressive aspects of his Sword Master blessing, the ability to use magic at will, to amplify his own equipment. With this power, Sacha was among the bearers of the 16 master blessings known in that world. While Sacha was advancing alone against the monster, the other members of the group took their positions. Tycoon, Robin, Piazzolla, and Reynold assumed their roles, but in the middle of the match something unexpected happened. The Snake Queen advanced directly towards them, and Reynold used his shield breaker ability, managing to land a direct hit. Piazzolla, observing the scene, lightly mocked him by saying that although he was the master of the shield, he had let the enemy get too close. Reynold was speechless at the criticism, but before he could respond, he realized something terrible. The snake was about to attack Jace, who was still carrying his luggage, and was distracted further back. Jace was walking without realizing the danger, when, suddenly, he heard a strange sound coming from upstairs. Looking back, he saw the snake lunging at him, with its mouth open, ready to attack. The fright was so great that he could barely react, but at the last moment Sacha appeared, and saved him, destroying the creature's head with a powerful blow. Falling to the ground, Jace looked at Sacha scared and embarrassed, still catching his breath. Sheepishly, he thanked her for saving him. He tried to say that he wanted to help too, but he couldn't complete the sentence. Sacha, angry and exhausted, yelled at him to stop causing trouble, and to just stay still. Meanwhile, the other members of the group were exploring the cave, and found human remains on the ground. Reynold warned the others that there were bones there and suggested that they take as many as they could back to the guild to report. Jay just stood there, watching the movement, feeling the weight of being just a burden within the team. After the battle ended, the group began collecting evidence of the monster's subjugation. Sacha said that it would only take the Snake Queen's core to present it to the guild. While the others were organizing, Jay walked away a little, and found a curious object in the rubble. It was an old book, with a thick and mysterious cover. Intrigued, he picked it up and wondered what it could be. Sacha yelled at him to stop messing around, and start packing his things. Smiling gracelessly, Jace replied with a pardon, and hid the book among his belongings. Later, already back at base, he examined the book more attentively. On one of the pages, there was a strange image that resembled a weapon called Desert Teakle. The letters were in an unknown language. All this awakened in Jace a familiar feeling, the same one he felt when he received his blessing. The boy began to think that maybe the book was the key he needed to finally understand his blessing. He got excited at the idea of trying to decipher the content little by little, in the hope that it would awaken something inside him. Excited, He entered the room where the group was gathered, and tried to share his discovery. But before he could explain himself, Sacha got up and coldly and firmly told him that he should leave the team. The impact was immediate. Jay was speechless, trying to understand if he had heard correctly. He asked, surprised by the promise they had made in the past, remembering when they dreamed of helping others together. Sacha replied that he hadn't forgotten, but that now the sacred team was about to be promoted in rank. He said he planned to make it the best team ever, and that if he stayed alone, it would be a burden. For her, it would hinder the progress of the group. He then threw a bag of coins on the floor, and asked her to use the money for the trip back home. Reynold, although uncomfortable, tried to comfort Jace with a smile, saying that they would do their best to take the team's name so far that even their village would hear it. With a knot in his chest, Jace lowered his head, and silently wondered if there really was no place for him in the group. When he commented that perhaps Reynolds was anxious to see him go, Reynolds was surprised and tried to respond. But Jace had already noticed the atmosphere and the judgment around him. Robin couldn't keep quiet any longer. With a shaky voice and raised arms, she declared that she was against Jay leaving. He reminded the others that his blessing was also of the master type, and that maybe one day they would discover their true potential. Sacha remained silent, but Reynold replied firmly, saying that the group's battles would become more and more dangerous from that moment on. Robin insisted, asking when that day would come. Reynold ignored her, and said that Jace was no longer needed on the sacred team. He stepped forward, and bluntly officially declared that Jace was kicked out of the team. Surprised and not knowing how to react, Jace simply listened as Reynold offered him one last help, a sum of money as a parting gift. But Jace rejected him, grabbed the package, and threw it on the ground, screaming that he didn't need it. He then declared that he would leave the group, but that he would never give up. With clenched fists, Jace shouted that he did not want to become an adventurer like Sacha, who abandons the weak to climb the ranks. The harsh words hit Sacha hard. He was unable to react, just looking at the coins lying on the floor. With restrained tears and determination in her eyes, Jace turned her back and walked away, slamming the door shut. Reynold called Sacha's name, but she remained motionless, silent. Later, Sacha apologized to Reynold for having involved him. He replied that he was fine. Sitting outside in the moonlight, he asked her if she was sure she wanted to go through with it. Sacha replied that yes, that even if he hated her forever, he would rather see him alive than killed in battle. It had been 2 months. Jace's story was about to take a new turn. 2 months after being kicked out of the sacred group, Jace was still trying to get stronger on his own. That day he had defeated 20 goblins on his own, his best result so far, but he knew that it was still not enough. Determined, he entered a tavern, reflecting on the need to continue training. However, as soon as he crossed the door, all eyes turned to him. A group of adventurers recognized him and began to murmur. They commented that he had been expelled from the sacred group, that he was now nothing more than a herb collector, and that Sacha and the others probably didn't want him anymore. One even said that Jace was the shame of the old group. Despite hearing everything, Jace continued to walk in silence, although inside frustration was growing, and he clenched his fist tightly. Soon after, while walking, Jay came across Sacha, who suddenly appeared in front of him. The two came face to face. Sacha called him by name, and his gaze was serious, but without hostility. Reynold and the other members of the sacred group were nearby, watching the scene. Sacha then began to explain. She asked him to listen to her. He said that south of there, in the direction of the desert kingdom of Disora, there was a swampy area where white clover flowers, an ingredient used in healing potions, grew. He explained that those flowers were rare, and that just at that moment they were blooming. He just listened to her in silence. Sacha finished his explanation by saying that was it and turned around to leave. Not knowing exactly what to think, Jace mulled over the information in his mind. He visualized the flower Sacha had mentioned and the direction he should now take. As he was returning, he became thoughtful. He began to wonder if Sacha and the others were somehow trying to help him, even from a distance. He recalled that white clover flowers were valuable, used in healing potions, and also well paid. It could be a good opportunity. With that thought, he began to consider if maybe Sacha still cared about him. Even if they were no longer in the same group, perhaps that warning about the flowers had been a disguised form of protection. Determined, he resolved that he would depart the next morning. The next day, Jace arrived at the swamps of the Dara region, where he came across an immense field, covered with white flowers. His eyes filled with admiration. He was amazed by the beauty of the place, and smiled. Carefully, she began to pick the flowers, filling her basket. As he worked, he reflected that although he was alone now, there was still hope that his dream and the Deshacha would one day come true. As he was packing, he thought he should at least be grateful for that advice. Then suddenly something strange happened. The sky darkened rapidly, without warning. He looked around, confused, and noticed a giant shadow hovering over him. As he looked up, his eyes widened in surprise. A huge monster with the appearance of a dragon or reptilian beast was falling from the sky directly towards him. Surprised and without time to think, Jace could only be outraged by what she was seeing. The huge monster fell in front of him with a deafening roar that made the ground shake. The young man, paralyzed by fear, could barely react. He tried to take a step back, but his body was shaking. His eyes were fixed on the creature's sharp teeth, and the only thing he could think about was that he had to escape as quickly as possible. The dragon charged, and Jay lunged to the side, rolling on the ground among the flowers, in an attempt to escape. He shouted, but his voice was mixed with the deafening sound of the impending battle. The monster advanced with brutality, and Jace could barely breathe from the panic. He received a blow that threw him into the air. His body hit the ground hard, and rolled among the flowers, until he was stopped next to a rock. Panting, dirty and bruised, he looked around, and began to hesitate. He wondered if that place was not, in fact, the dragon's territory. It was then that the worst thought crossed his mind. Had it been Sacha who had sent him there on purpose? As the monster approached once more, Jay sweating and hurt, he began to question everything. He wondered if, after all, he was really just a burden to Sacha. Physical and emotional pain mingled inside her as she remembered the harsh words she had heard. Everything echoed over and over in his mind. Desperate, with his body bleeding, and the monster getting closer and closer, he shouted that he did not want to die. He repeated the phrase as if it were a sentence, as if he could protect himself with words. At that moment, his eyes were fixed on a spot on the floor, the strange book he had found earlier, now open and shining. Suddenly an intense light emerged from him. Something inside Jace reacted, and his body was enveloped by a powerful glow. The book trembled in his hand as the wind swirled around him, forming a spiral. For a moment, everything stopped, the fear, the pain, the doubt. That's when something inside of him woke up. Just as the light completely enveloped him, a force was activated inside him. Before his eyes a strange weapon materialized. Something he had never seen before, but recognized instinctively, was a grenade launcher, the M79. Despite not having learned anything about its functioning, his body knew exactly how to use it. Surprised but filled with an unshakable certainty, Jay held the gun, and muttered that he could feel it. That he knew he could kill the monster with that. As the dragon furiously advanced, Jace raised the weapon, and pointed it directly at him. He told himself that all he had to do was pull the trigger, and an explosion wouldn't stop. With a sudden confidence, he fired. The projectile flew straight into the creature's mouth, which was roaring ready to attack. A second later, the explosion happened. The impact was violent. The shock wave and debris destroyed a large part of the monster's body, throwing it to pieces across the field. Jace fell to his knees panting, as he watched the field now in silence. A single phrase echoed in his mind, which was "Master of Arms, this is my blessing." The book still open in front of him confirmed the truth. The weapon he had used was not of this world, and yet it was part of his destiny. With a trembling body, Jace fell down sitting up. Gradually, the tension gave way to a nervous laugh. He laughed out loud bitterly, while tears and sweat ran down his face. Laughing, he muttered that Sacha had betrayed him. The image of her smiling came back to his mind, now distorted by pain. Then, he covered his face with his blood-stained hand, and promised himself, with a look full of anger and pain, "I will not forget this." Meanwhile at the guild headquarters, Gist the guild master was congratulating the sacred group for officially reaching the rank Reynold. And Piazzolla thanked him respectfully, but soon after, Gist changed the subject, and casually asked for Jace. Sacha was surprised by the question, and wanted to know why. So, Gist commented that there were a lot of negative rumors circulating about the guy lately. They said he was still trying to advance as a solo adventurer, even without a group or support. And that people made fun of him for that. Even worse, some claimed that Sacha and the others of the sacred group were deliberately trying to discredit or endanger him, in order to get rid of him. Sacha was greatly surprised, and vehemently denied it. Reynolds also protested, visibly shocked by the innuendo. Gist quickly reassured them, assuring that he trusted them, and knew that they would not do such a thing, but warned them that the more famous they became, the more envy and suspicion would arise, especially around former members. The conversation continued, and at one point East mentioned that he had heard that Jay was still determined to pursue his childhood dream. It was then that Sacha, somewhat guilty, revealed that she herself had suggested a good place to collect herbs. The swamps near the desert kingdom of Dara. At that moment, Gist dropped his cup as he realized the gravity of that information. He stood up suddenly, visibly alarmed, and asked if he meant the small swamps in that area. Sacha confirmed, still not understanding her reaction. Then, Geist urgently revealed that that place was the territory of a higher SS rank monster, the Elder Black Dragon, one of the most dangerous that existed. Before they could process the information, a guild employee rushed in and announced that there was an emergency. Gist ordered everyone to come down immediately. Sacha obeyed, his heart already pounding. As they descended the guild staircase, everyone was faced with an incredible scene. Jace, covered in blood and wounds, was dragging the black dragon's head by himself. Silence spread throughout the room. The sacred group, including Sacha and Reynolds, was paralyzed, their eyes wide open. Sacha could barely stammer out his name. Jace, in the middle of the stares and the murmurs, just watched them in silence. However, his gaze, now dark and determined, made it clear that he was no longer the same. In the main hall of the guild, everyone was still in shock over the arrival of Jay-Z, the head of the defeated dragon. But the silence was broken when he looked directly at Sacha and spoke in a trembling and bitter voice. He asked her if she hated him that much. He said that if his intention was to see him dead, then unfortunately the plan had failed because he had survived. Sacha didn't understand at all, and tried to ask him what he was saying, but Jace wouldn't give him space. He shouted that he knew very well what she had done, and that he would not accept any more lies. Then he pointed to the creature's head, lying on the ground, and proudly declared that he had killed the dragon completely alone. The anger in his eyes was mixed with the pain. He confessed that for a brief moment, he had believed that Sacha still trusted him, that he supported him. But now he felt that it had all been an illusion. He said he was tired of trusting people. Then, Jace shouted with all his might that he didn't need anyone anymore, that he would become the strongest, using only his own strength. While everyone watched him in amazement, he declared that he was determined to continue alone from that moment on. However, in the middle of his speech, fatigue and injuries began to take their toll on him. Staggering, he tried to continue, but fell to his knees. Even with difficulty, he looked at Sacha for the last time, and tried to say something, but before he could finish, his eyes closed and he collapsed on the floor, unconscious. Sacha ran to him, calling him desperately, shouting his name through tears. The sacred group remained motionless, dominated by a mixture of guilt, surprise and helplessness at what had just happened. It had been 2 years since the day he collapsed in the guild hall after facing the elder dragon. Now, he was no longer the helpless boy who depended on others. He had become an S-rank adventurer, known as the Herald of Darkness. His appearance was unrecognizable, a patch covered one of his eyes, scars marked his face, and he wore a dark cape decorated with runic symbols. He radiated confidence and coolness. He appeared in the city again, heading to the guild reception to renew his stay for another month, breakfast included. The receptionist was surprised to see him there, considering his fame and power. He asked why someone like him would choose such a simple accommodation, but Jace calmly replied that precisely because it was an unexpected place for someone of his level, it was the perfect hiding place. In the newspaper, he saw that Sacha, now called Brynhild, the Silver Valkyrie, had also reached the S rank. Her former group, Sacred, had become even more influential, and applications to join the team were at a high. He simply observed the news with an empty gaze, without expressing any emotion. Soon after he was summoned to the guild master's office. Gast, now identified as one of the strongest in unarmed combat, and also of S rank, wanted to talk to him. Jace came in naturally, took a sip of tea, and asked the reason for the appointment. Gist, almost incredulous, commented that he had heard that Jace had defeated a nitro lag, a creature of higher levels, by himself. Jace confirmed it without bragging. He simply stated that he had learned well and joked that it was all thanks to his training with Gist. The guild master, surprised and laughing, replied that he had never taught something so absurd. Even surrounded by incredible feats, Jace kept a low profile and did not get carried away by fame. But the darkness in his gaze and his reserved posture made it clear that something inside him had changed forever. While reflecting on her journey, Jace was given a new mission. He had been officially recognized as an S-rank adventurer. Monster ratings ranged from F to SSS, but the highest level that had been seen in the field was SS rank. However, Jace had defeated creatures of that level and even beyond. Even so, when he delivered more materials to the guild, he received an unexpected recommendation. Gist, the guild master, handed him a solemn invitation, sealed with the emblem of royalty. It was the invitation to the official S-rank ceremony, a rare event and of great nobility. Jay was surprised to see that the royal family was involved, but Gist explained to him that the first king had also been the first S-rank adventurer, and that the tradition had been maintained ever since. To be officially recognized, Jace would have to accept an S-rank mission directly at the ceremony. Only then would his name enter the official records. It was then that Yeast mentioned something that completely changed the atmosphere. Sacha would also be present. Upon hearing her name, Jay's eyes narrowed. He stated firmly and without hesitation that he could never forgive her. Gist tried to explain to him that Sacha had kicked him out of the group to protect him, that she didn't want to see him hurt, and that it had all been a difficult decision. But Jace couldn't accept it. He remembered very well the cold words she used, the moments of humiliation. As much as his reason understood, his heart was still bleeding. He admitted that he did not disagree with Sacha's logic, with the idea of abandoning the weak, in order to strengthen the group. He even believed that that was the only way the sacred group could become the most powerful, but that didn't erase the pain of rejection. Decisively, Jay got up and declared that he would continue alone. He claimed that he no longer trusted anyone, that his classmates meant nothing to him. His goal now was to follow his own path to the top, without depending on anyone. With a cold and firm look, he said goodbye to Geist and left the place. The old master just watched him leave through the window, silently pondering. Despite all the strength Jace had gained, he was still just a boy, carrying deep sorrows. It had been months since the S-rank ceremony. Now, Jace and Sacha were together again, but not by choice. Both were in front of the royalty of the kingdom of Ibel, attending the official call of the crown. The current monarch, His Majesty Barbarian Zai, received them personally with all the formality of the case. The king announced that as officially recognized adventurers with S-rank, both of them would receive their first direct missions from the kingdom. Sacha respectfully accepted, while Jay limited himself to a brief response, keeping his attitude cold and distant. Shortly after, Crown Prince Crest and firstborn Princess Muain were introduced. It was Crest who announced that Sacha would be in charge of defeating the crystal golems that had appeared in the mines to the south of the kingdom, a threat that was rapidly intensifying. To everyone's surprise, the prince himself offered to accompany Sacha on the mission. She accepted the task firmly. Then it was Jace's turn to receive his order. Princess Maiwani, cheerful and smiling, took it upon herself to deliver the mission to him with great enthusiasm. He explained that his task would be to collect the rare herb Eternal Moonlight, a sacred plant used to make spiritual elixirs. Such a plant could only be found in the sacred mountains of Gagasia, within the forest territory of the kingdom of Adora, east of Ivolk. Before Jace could reply, Maiwani happily added that she would accompany him on the mission herself, as it would be his first official adventure. Upon hearing this, Jace kept a serious expression, showing no emotion whatsoever, and simply replied dryly that he accepted the mission. With all eyes fixed on him, he declared in a direct voice, and without hesitation, that he would not allow His Highness to accompany him. The room fell silent. Maiwani froze in surprise. Crest, Sacha, and even the king were stunned by such daring. Jace then explained his decision. He said that the Gagasia region was dangerous, full of ferocious monsters, and that the presence of the princess would reduce his chances of success by at least 20%. In addition, protecting someone so important would put his life at risk, and he would not accept carrying that responsibility. Even when they questioned his decision and asked him for a justification, Jace was direct. He worked alone, without companions, without distractions. He immediately asked the king for formal permission to carry out his mission alone. After a few moments of silence, the barbarian king let out a powerful laugh that echoed throughout the hall. Never before had an adventurer refused the company of a member of the royal family, much less so firmly. However, to everyone's surprise, the king was not offended. On the contrary, he showed respect. He acknowledged that Jace had accepted and completed several S-rank missions completely alone, because his request was legitimate. Even in the face of the opposition of Princess Maiwani, who begged for her first adventure, the king stood firm. He declared that he would make an exception and forbade the princess to accompany him. She, visibly frustrated, contained her anger and disappointment, clenching her fists in silence. The king then officially declared the ceremony over, finalizing the appointment and the delivery of missions. Thus, Jace, now formally invested as an elite adventurer recognized by royalty, was ready to depart for a new mission. Once again, completely alone. After the official ceremony, a relaxed reception was organized at the castle. While the servants were preparing the dinner, the barbarian king consorted animatedly with Yeast. Both toasted with laughter, commenting on Jace's behavior. Ray remarked that the boy was truly unique, and Yeast, although more reserved, nodded silently, visibly worried. Meanwhile, the rest of the guests socialized between smiles and fine food. However, Princess Maiwani had not yet accepted the decision that prevented her from accompanying Jace. Determined, she headed straight for Sacha, her hands clenched and her eyes shining with determination. She asked him to join her mission against the golems, arguing that it would be her first adventure, and that she was determined to prove her worth. Sacha, without hesitation, replied to him with a kind smile, assuring him that there would be no problem. Her brother Crest, clearly upset, tried to berate her for acting on impulse, but Sacha lightly reassured everyone, saying that Maiwani would not get in the way. At the back of the living room, Jace watched everything in silence. Seeing Maiwani approaching Sacha and the sacred group, his mind was invaded by memories. Fleeting images of when he was also part of that team. His eyes widened, his fists slowly clenched, and he averted his gaze, swallowing the bitterness he still carried with him. Even now, seeing him smiling together, I couldn't erase the pain of being left behind. With a resigned sigh, he muttered that maybe it was a good idea to go out for a drink. However, just as he was turning to leave the living room, a voice called him. Someone had noticed that he was about to leave. Already outside the castle, under the moonlight, Jace was walking in silence after the ceremony, until he was reached by a familiar voice. It was Sacha. With hesitant steps, she approached and asked him to speak. Just the two of us. Jace stopped for a moment, but didn't turn around. Sacha, her eyes full of regret, told him that she wanted to apologize, something she had been holding back for a long time. However, before she could explain herself, Jace replied coldly that there was nothing between them that deserved to be said anymore. For him, what needed to be talked about had already been ignored for years. Still, Sacha insisted. She said she didn't want to carry that guilt any longer in silence, but Jace couldn't contain his anger anymore. He laughed wryly, and then burst into screams, his eyes bulging and his body shaking with fury. He asked her why she had decided to apologize now, after so long. He reminded her that for 2 years she had countless opportunities to talk to him. That she remained silent even when she was on the verge of death. That she had time to rise through the ranks, lead the sacred group, receive the applause of the guild, and yet, she never looked back. With every word, Jace released the pain he had held back all that time. He shouted that he could not accept an apology from someone who only spoke when everything had already changed. Sacha, standing in front of him, could not say anything. She only listened to him in silence, with tears in her eyes, as the weight of his decisions finally fell on her with full force. For Jace, it was just another empty gesture. Sacha tried to explain himself, but his voice failed him. Jace interrupted her coldly, saying that from that moment on, whatever she said no longer meant anything to him. Sacha, with wide eyes and a shocked expression, tried to take his arm, trying to stop him. Crying, she finally began to speak sincerely. She admitted that she had been afraid, that she had exiled him believing that it was the best thing to protect him, that she thought that by fulfilling her dream, everything would make sense in the end. However, her voice was trembling and the words came out between sobs. Jace, for his part, wasn't reacting the same way anymore. He listened to her until the end, but his eyes were still cold. When Sacha talked about our dream, he let go of her arm and walked away, saying that that was never his dream. That it was always only hers. He stated that he should not use it as an excuse to justify his decisions, and that if it had really been a shared dream, he never felt part of it. Firmly, Jace concluded that it was not a shared dream, but rather Satcha's dream, and only his. Still in the rain, Jace faced her with a steady gaze, and a voice full of conviction. She said that her new dream was to become the strongest by himself, without depending on anyone, and that unlike her, he would never discard someone just because they were weak. For him, if being strong meant abandoning others, then he preferred to be alone from the very beginning. His words, like blades, cut deep. Satcha remained silent, overwhelmed with guilt, while the raindrops hid the tears on her face. Jace continued, saying whatever her reasons were, Satcha had also thrown away the dream they once shared. That even if he had done it with good intentions, the result had been the same. I had abandoned him, and now it was too late to recover what was lost. With his head down and his cloak soaked, he expressed that he hoped she would achieve her goal. That of making the sacred group the strongest of all, even if he was no longer part of it. Then he turned around and started walking away, saying only goodbye. Satcha fell to his knees on the wet floor, without the strength to answer him. Jay walked away without looking back, and an absolute certainty formed in his mind, no matter how hard he tries. It will never be the same again. On an ancient grimoire page, the legendary eternal moonlight plant was described as a rare ingredient for spiritual elixirs. Its most prominent feature was its own brilliance, and it could only be found on the top of the sacred mountain of Gagasia, within the territory of the forest of the nation of Edora. After his argument with Satcha, Jace had returned to his inn, taking a deep breath, and trying to mentally prepare for his next mission. In his room, he had all the essentials at hand, his cloak made with the skin of the black dragon of higher SS rank, his adventurer card, the ring with the box of items where he kept supplies, and on the table, the old book that still harbored so many mysteries about his blessing. Despite his power, Jace still hadn't managed to completely decipher the contents of the tome, and that bothered him. Therefore, he decided to continue accepting missions while improving his skills, in the hope of gradually unlocking the true potential of the weapons master. In the guild, he arrived early, looking for a new mission. The receptionist greeted him politely, informing him that the guild master was meeting with Satcha. Without giving it any importance, Jay went to the quest board and reviewed the available options. The one with the highest difficulty was only rank B, nothing worthy of its level. While he was evaluating the missions, a figure quietly approached him. She was an elf, young, with a firm stance and a direct gaze. His presence caught Jace's attention for a moment. Noticing his gaze, she asked him if elves were rare in the area. Jace replied yes, especially outside the Ictora forest. The elf confirmed that indeed, it was unusual for one of her own to leave her homeland. The brief conversation between the two hinted that this mysterious figure would soon have a more important role. Jace's mission was about to begin. The goal was simple: to collect the very rare eternal moonlight, a plant that shines on its own, and is used in spiritual elixirs. However, its location was not at all easy, since it was located on the top of the sacred Gassia mountain, inside the forest of Ictora, sacred territory of the elves. At his lodgings, Jace was checking his equipment. His cloak, made with the skin of the elder dragon, still served as an extremely sturdy armor. He was also wearing his magic ring, with the ability to store items in stasis, his S-rank adventurer card, and of course the old book that he was still trying to decipher. At the guild, while waiting to see Master Gist, Jace was attended by a receptionist, but something unexpected happened. He met the elf he had seen earlier again, who was now formally introducing herself. Her name was Prisha, an adventurer of Veprisha rank, commented that she traveled alone, relying solely on her own strength. This surprised Jace, who felt identified with his attitude. For the first time, I heard from another person the same philosophy that he followed, to trust only in oneself. When she asked him about his mission, he showed her his Slet letter, and directly revealed to her his purpose in Hectora, which she immediately regretted. Hearing this, Prisha was extremely surprised. She began to question him insistently, attracting attention in the living room. Uncomfortable with the situation, Jace tried to change the subject, but fortunately the receptionist called him to talk to Yeast, and he took the opportunity to escape from the conversation, saying goodbye with a simple "see you later." The conversation with Gist, the master revealed important information. On the top of the Gagasia mountain inhabited a dragon of SC rank, so dangerous that even the Yggdrasil clan, one of the 4 largest in the world, avoided approaching. Gist explained that this clan was composed mainly of demi-humans, and was led by the elf heroine Ibis. Unlike guilds, clans could act independently. Before saying goodbye, Gist handed him a sealed envelope, a cover letter. He said that if Jace had problems in Hectora, the letter could serve as a backup to the clan and Brazil. Despite her initial reluctance, Jace accepted the gift with a simple nod. He said goodbye with his typical coolness, and left the room, ready to take another step towards the top, completely alone. Outside the royal capital, Jace was advancing on his mission alone, but his instincts alerted him. He stopped, pulled out his gun, and pointed in the direction of a slight movement between the trees. Firmly asked, "Who's there?" When he got no response, he fired a warning shot. The sound echoed, and a figure emerged from the shadows with his hands up. It was Prisha, the elf he had met in the guild. She admitted that she had been discovered, and said that she needed to talk to him. Jace, distrustful, asked why I was following him. Prisha replied that she wanted to ask him a favor, but that only he could do it. Despite Jace's immediate refusal, she insisted. He revealed that he also wanted to go to the sacred Gagation mountain, because his sister was seriously ill, and the only ingredient that could save her was the eternal herb. However, since it was monster mating season, entry was forbidden for ordinary adventurers. But Jace had an advantage, an official request from the kingdom of Ibel, which controlled the Hara forest. With that mission, I had a special permit to enter. Prisha knew this because she had overheard her conversation with Yeast, just as Jace had done with Sacha a few days earlier. Prisha spoke firmly, saying that she had to save her sister. He begged Jace to let her accompany him to Gagas Mountain, even if it was as a temporary companion. He promised not to be a burden, and even offered her all the money he had. With determined eyes, she stated that even if she died on the way, she was ready to accept it. He bluntly told her that her motives did not interest him. But then with a sigh, he said that he didn't care if I followed him, as long as I understood one thing: they were not partners. If anything happened to him, he'd be on his own. Prisha accepted without hesitation. He claimed to know how to protect himself. When he turned his back on her, she called him by name for the first time. She said her name was Prisha, and she was glad to meet him. He just looked at her out of the corner of his eye and went on his way. On the way, both faced an attack of goblins, and Jace used his weapon to eliminate them quickly and effectively. Prisha was impressed, and asked if that was the power of his blessing. He confirmed yes and explained that his blessing granted him total mastery over otherworldly weapons such as pistols, shotguns, and grenade launchers. In return, Prisha explained that her own blessing, Spirit Command, allowed her to see and interact with spirits invisible to normal people, and that these spirits could help her hide or keep watch. As when she overheard the conversation between Jace and the guild master. That night they camped, and Prisha was surprised by the amount of equipment Jace took out of his magic ring, which functioned as an infinite storage. When she asked him what he was cooking, Jace replied that he just felt like doing it. She remembered that they were not even partners, but accepted the gesture. When tasting the food, he marveled at its taste and asked if I had experience. Jace explained that he used to do everything the same, including cooking, housework, and personal care. Prisha thanked him for the food, and said that although she had imagined he would be a cold person, she was actually very grateful to have found him, because now she had a chance to save her sister. He only answered with a silent look, and thought to himself that that scene with the fire and someone next to him reminded him of something far away, almost forgotten. The next morning, when they reached an elevated area of the forest, Prisha pointed out a huge tree visible in the distance. He said that it was the base of the Yggdrasil clan, one of the most powerful in the world, consisting mainly of demi-humans, and led by the elf heroine Ibis. He looked at the tree seriously, knowing that from that moment on things would become even more dangerous. After several days of traveling, Jace and Prisha arrived at the main gate of the forest nation of Ictora, where they were immediately stopped by the guards. When questioned, Jace handed over his entry certificate, and explained that he had come at the request of the royal family to access the sacred mountain of Gagasha. The elf guard checked the documents carefully, but showed doubts when he noticed that Jace was accompanied. Prisha, wearing a hooded cape, was trying to go unnoticed. Jace shot him an inquisitive look, and whispered irritably, asking him what he was trying to do. She also replied in a whisper, asking to be ignored for the time being. With some hesitation, Jace also presented the letter of recommendation written by Yeist, the guild master, addressed to the Yggdrasil clan. As soon as the elf guard read the contents, and saw the official seal, he opened his eyes in surprise, asked them to wait for a moment, and hurriedly left. Just then two older elves appeared, and greeted Jace with respect, saying that the clan leader was waiting for him. He complained about the unnecessary fuss just for delivering a letter, but he could not resist the invitation. Prisha decided to wait outside, while the elves guided Jace inside the sacred tree. The elder elf explained that Ivis, the leader of the Yggdrasil clan, had more influence than Hadora's own royalty, and that it was best not to offend her. The inside of the clan base, located inside a gigantic living tree, was accessed by a magic elevator. Something that surprised Jace because it was not common in that world. Upon reaching the top, they were led to a secluded and sacred shrine where Ibis was waiting for them. It was the most important place of the Yggdrasil clan, and there it would be decided if Jace would receive support to continue his mission in the mountain. After a long climb up the sacred tree, Jace finally arrived at the shrine of the Yggdrasil clan, where he was greeted by their leader, the elf heroine Ibis. Upon entering the room guided by an old man, Jace was surprised to see a serene-looking young elf, sitting in a relaxed way on a platform. Welcoming him with a simple greeting, Ibis looked at Jace curiously, and then said matter-of-factly that he already knew who she was. The disciple of Yeast. The way she talked, carefree and smiling, left Jace confused, as he was expecting a much more formal figure. When he asked her if she really was the famous Iyama, he thought to himself that she just looked like a girl. Next, I opened the letter delivered by Yeast, and read aloud that Yeast wanted her to help Jace, but she had also written that he would probably refuse her help. Upon hearing this, Jace felt embarrassed and upset, while Ivis laughed out loud, saying that Jace knew him well. Then he mentioned that there was something strangely nostalgic about the boy, as he watched him closely, and even noticed the smell of gunpowder coming from him. Curious, she asked him directly if he knew about firearms. He hesitated, surprised that she recognized him so quickly. In response, Ivis explained that he had had a partner in the past who used similar weapons, so he recognized the smell and the presence. That simple mention intrigued Jace. Then, he formally introduced himself, and handed her the old book that he had been carrying with him since he awakened her blessing. He asked her directly if she knew him. As soon as he saw the cover, Ibis was silent for a moment, until he said with a slight smile that he did not imagine that such a book still existed. Intrigued, Jace asked him if he really recognized him, and Ibis replied that he did, without hesitation, flipping through the content. Pact followed. He revealed that the book was actually the diary of someone named Naga. Jace asked who that person was, and Ibis explained that Naga was a man who had come from another world, and somehow ended up in that realm. Jay was surprised to hear this, especially when Ibis added that the book was full of letters from that other world that even she couldn't read. He commented that he never knew exactly what Naga was writing, but he knew that he used weapons like Jace's. That's why he recognized the smell of gunpowder. Upon hearing this, Jace asked if he knew anyone who could translate the content. However, Ibis was direct, even though she couldn't read it. She found it curious that Jace was already understanding parts of the text on his own. Then, he was surprised to realize that he could now decipher more pages than before. At this, Ivy perked up even more, and with a mischievous smile, asked her to tell him what she had read. Jace, a little puzzled by the approach, hesitated, but Hay just laughed and told him that he shouldn't be offended. That he was just curious because there was something strangely familiar about him. While Jace was showing Ibis the contents of Naga's diary, the leader of the Yggdrasil clan reacted unusually. The text mentioned how adorable Naga found Ibis, comparing her to a cat, and even considered hunting feline monsters, just to make her a pair of ears and a tail as a gift. Innocently, Jace would read those sentences aloud without imagining the impact, and Ibis would be completely paralyzed, embarrassed, and screaming exaggeratedly. Then, he asked her with a direct and curious tone if she and Naga had been lovers, which made Ivy confused and angry immediately. She immediately jumped on him and shouted that that was enough for today, ending the conversation abruptly and excitedly. However, before he left, he said out loud that if he needed more help, he could come back another day. Later, Jace, back on his way to the sacred Gasha mountain, reflected on the fact that he was able to read more and more pages of the book, which made him suspect that this ancient object had a mind of its own. Meanwhile, he and Prisha continued their journey, getting closer and closer to the top of the mountain. Further on, at the top of the trail, enveloped in a thick fog, they both felt the visibility decrease. Then, Prisha commented that she could barely see, and just at that moment, a powerful roar erupted in front of them. A huge, slimy-looking monster emerged from the ground and attacked without warning. Without wasting any time, Jace reacted quickly, fired his magic weapon, protecting Opria, and containing the creature with powerful shots. After resisting the initial attack, Jace concluded that the enemy was taking advantage of the fog to lurk. So he activated his power again and carefully prepared his weapon, while firmly telling her she appreciates that she stayed alert and kept an eye on any movement around her. Shortly after the match, while they were still shocked by the confrontation, Prisha looked at Jace with doubt on her face, and asked him why he had helped her if he had said before that they were not partners. He replied simply, saying that she had told him that her motivation was to save her sister, and that although she had no obligation to protect her, she also saw no reason not to help her. Therefore, he only saw it as a way to give back to her everything he had learned from her during the trip. Brillo was surprised, touched and excited, so she sincerely smiled and thanked him. Jace replied with a short and direct, "You're welcome." However, before even a moment of peace could pass, a powerful roar echoed in the sky. They both looked up, and then they saw the silhouette of a dragon crossing the clouds. Brilla deduced that the creature was hunting, which meant that it was the perfect opportunity to get the rare Yerba Lunagrama Eterna. Without thinking twice, he ran to the hillside where the plant was growing. He called her, trying to warn her of the danger, but she answered as she ran, promising to return immediately and deliver the reward later. He tried to reach her, although he knew that he would not be able to stop her in time. Meanwhile, Jace was thinking seriously. He knew that dragons were extremely territorial, and that even if they had gone out to hunt, they would return at the slightest hint of invasion. He muttered to himself that she was underestimating the creature. Without wasting any time, he also rushed towards the place, aware that he had to avoid a disaster. He ran down the mist-shrouded hillside, while trying to reach Aprila, but before he got too far, he was surrounded by several creatures that emerged from the ground like giant worms, with huge mouths and cylindrical bodies. Seeing this, he complained loudly with anger and frustration, saying that now this had to happen too, revealing his indignation about another obstacle at such a critical moment. On the other hand, Priya had reached the top of the hillside alone, reaching the place where the eternal lunagram was supposed to be, and she shouted to herself that she had arrived. He began to search desperately among the rocks and undergrowth, scanning the terrain with wide-open eyes. However, soon his expression changed to despair. Panting, he realized that there was nothing left, not a single sample of the plant. Then, he started muttering that without her, he couldn't make the elixir that would save his sister. Feeling that he had failed, he fell on his knees to the floor, with a tearful expression and a choked voice, asking for forgiveness from his sister for not being able to fulfill his promise. It was at that moment when an overwhelming roar cut through the sky, making the ground shake, and forcing Priscilla to look up with her eyes wide open from sheer panic. A colossal creature appeared before her, descending forcefully from the sky. It was the green elephant dragon, an SS+ rank beast with a grotesque appearance, rough skin, and huge fangs, who landed in front of the elf with hostile intent, looking directly at her with his shining eyes. Brilla came face to face with the green elephant dragon, which roared loudly and opened its huge mouth in an attempt to intimidate her, while the nearby rocks trembled with the impact of the sound. Although her body was paralyzed by fear, she closed her eyes tightly and clenched her spear with determination, ready to fight. In his thought, he reasoned that if he managed to hurt the creature and distract it long enough, maybe he could escape with his life. With an agile movement, he concentrated the spiritual energy around the spear, and then launched a direct attack against the dragon's head. Aiming at a vital point, the spear cut through the air with speed and force, but as it hit its target, the creature's skin barely flinched, as if the blow hadn't caused any real damage. Surprised, Brilla opened her eyes in disbelief and concluded that the spiritual energy had no effect on that enemy. Confused and scared, she prepared to launch a more powerful attack, but just before acting, the creature advanced. The monster roared even more violently, its throat vibrating like thunder, and then it launched its gigantic tongue at Prisha, who tried to dodge it. Still, she was thrown through the air, and before she could recover, she was enveloped and immobilized by the creature's slimy tongue. The force with which she was caught made her scream in pain. Her body was crushed to the ground, and then lifted up, as if she were nothing more than a helpless prey, completely at the mercy of the enemy. Meanwhile, Brilla was screaming, as her body was crushed by the green elephant dragon tentacle. However, in an instant, A shot exploded with force, directly hitting the creature, and causing the blood to splash violently. At that precise moment, Jace appeared on the battlefield with a furious expression, taking precise aim, and firing again, to free Priya, who fell to the ground panting. Still surprised to see him there, Prisha asked him what he was doing there. But Jace, panting and irritated, shouted at her asking why she had been so reckless as to go out alone. Wasting no time, he pushed her away from the creature and ordered her to stay behind, while he took the lead. Quickly, he reloaded his weapon and began strafing the enemy with an intense burst of bullets. However, noticing that despite the impact, the shots did not cause enough lethal damage, he changed weapons with determination and began to use his rifle for more powerful attacks. With each shot resonating loudly in the air, the bullets penetrated the dragon's body, which roared in pain and reacted violently. Although Jay remained calm, reloading quickly and firing incessantly, with a concentrated face and precise movements, as if he were in total harmony with the weapons he was using. When the monster tried to counterattack, Jay jumped to the side, reloaded nimbly, and fired a shot straight into the center of the creature's head, causing it to back up and scream even louder. Finally, the green elephant dragon's body collapsed with a huge rumble. However, Jay remained alert, looking around to make sure the monster was really dead. Brilla, still trembling, asked if the creature had been defeated, to which Jace replied doubtfully, saying it couldn't have been that easy. Then he looked at her and asked if she was okay. After a short silence, she replied yes, still in a state of shock at what had just happened. Then Brilla lowered her gaze, and embarrassed asked her why she had run there, even after telling her to wait. Jace did not answer immediately, and she, with a flushed face, wondered if perhaps he had come to save her of his own free will. He, catching his breath, simply commented that it already smelled bad there, and that it was better to leave. To which Prisha replied shyly, still visibly moved by his attitude. As they were walking, Jace noticed something strange, and asked what it was that was glowing, pointing to a nearby place. Then, Prisha quickly turned around, and with amazement recognized that they were flowers of eternal moon grass. She explained, surprised, that during the day they did not shine, which explained why she had not been able to see them before. However, as she got closer, they noticed that many of the flowers were wilting. And both Jace and Prisha realized that the dragon's blood had spread across the field, contaminating the plants. Priya was shocked to see that even after all the struggle, the much-needed ingredient was getting lost before her eyes. Just when they thought all was lost, Jay pointed to a corner, drawing their attention, and at that moment, Prisha's eyes widened at the sight of a single flower still intact, discreetly glowing under the haze. Without thinking twice, he ran to her, took out a small jar, and carefully put the plant away. His eyes filled with tears, he held the jar tightly against his chest, knowing that now he had a chance to save his sister. After the battle with the dragon, Priya picked up the jar, with the eternal moonweed flower, and told Jace, with sincerity and gratitude, that the flower belonged to him, since he had been the one who defeated the monster. Jace looked at her in silence, but Priya insisted that the mission was accomplished, and that he had earned the flower, while she would look for more elsewhere if necessary. While they were chatting near the entrance of the mountain path, a group of elves appeared calling Prisha, visibly worried about her disappearance. Among them was a young man named Audra, who seemed to know her very well. Upon seeing him, Brilla appeared surprised and somewhat nervous, while he simply watched her cautiously. Audra approached Jace, confirmed his identity as the S-rank adventurer who had accompanied Priya to Gagasia, and then explained that she was not just any elf, but the younger sister of Queen Elsa, sovereign of the forest kingdom of Hydra. Then, Audra asked Priya if she had gotten the flower she needed to heal her sister. Brilla, with a frustrated tone, replied that unfortunately no, as the flower had withered due to the dragon's blood. Audra, with a more rational tone, said that maybe it was time to give up and accept her sister's fate, which made Priscilla react with fury, yelling at her if she really wanted her sister to die. Audra tried to justify herself by saying that this was Elzar's destiny, and that there was nothing they could do about it, adding further that they should talk about the details of the arranged marriage between him and Prisha. This imposition left her even more dismayed, and Jace, realizing the situation, simply put a hand on her shoulder, and said in a kind tone that it looked like she needed to leave, saying goodbye with a simple goodbye Priya. Priya, surprised by Jace's serenity, only watched him as he walked away down the road, leaving her behind with the image of someone who, despite claiming that he did not trust others, had saved his life and respected his decision. The next morning, after returning from her mission, Priscilla quietly entered the royal room of Queen Elsa, her sister, in the forest kingdom of Edora. With a heavy heart and glassy eyes, she approached the bed where Elzar was lying, and holding back the tears, she told him in a choppy voice that she had not been able to find the flower of the eternal moon grass, asking his forgiveness for having failed. Elsa, with a serene and tender smile, replied that everything was fine, and that it was simply the work of fate, then asked her sister to tell her everything about her trip through the West and Central lands, showing a sincere desire to meet your adventure. Prisha nodded silently, but before she started, she said that she had brought something special. Then, she took the jar with the bright flower of the eternal moon grass out of her purse, and handed it to her sister. Elsa's eyes opened with surprise and excitement, as she recognized the flower immediately. With a choppy voice, he confirmed that indeed, it was the eternal moon weed. Prisha, smiling with tears in her eyes, whispered Jace's name as a sign of gratitude. A few days later, Jace was sitting in the guild master's room, taking you with a serious and silent countenance. Master Gist commented with some surprise that Jace had technically failed the mission, even if it was only a formal request from the family. He added that given how adamant he had been about the princess' presence, it would have been better for him to complete the mission successfully. Jace, with his usual expression, replied that he only intended to continue accepting quests and exploring dungeons as usual. Gist then mentioned that by coincidence there was a perfect new quest for him, a newly discovered dungeon that needed to be investigated, and handed him a scroll with the details. As Jay was saying his goodbyes and turning to leave the living room, a familiar voice called out to him. It was Prisha, who had just entered. He looked at her in surprise, not understanding why she was there, while she, with a gentle smile and a firm look, answered only with her presence. Brilla stood in front of Jace, holding a jar with the flower of the eternal moon grass in her hands, and began to sincerely thank him. He explained that he had managed to cure his sister using the elixir prepared with the flower that he had helped her obtain, and that now the Zara was well enough to resume her duties as queen. With a firm look and full of emotion, she declared that she felt that she owed him a lot and that she wished in some way to compensate him for everything he had done. Jace, with his usual serious expression, bluntly asked her what she wanted now that she was free to pursue her life as she wished. Prisha replied that as a reward for her achievements, she had been released to continue her travels freely, and had even managed to cancel her engagement to Audra. She clarified that she did not want to force any kind of closeness, but that she would like to accompany him on his trips, even if they were not official companions, simply as a companion with whom he could talk as much as he wanted. However, with a suspicious look, and without any patience for sentimentalities, Jay immediately refused, coldly saying that he was not interested. Still, Prisha kept a light smile, accepting the rejection without losing her good mood. As he was walking away, she asked him if he would at least agree to share a meal with her, mentioning that there was a nice cafe nearby, and that she would take care of everything. Meanwhile, a sequence of cutscenes showed the other adventurers, including Sacha, Crest, Mibani and the others, gathered and ready to depart on a new Royal Order mission. Excited for their next adventure, with an energetic shout, Sacha led them, saying that it was time to defeat the Crystal Golem. As the group of adventurers led by Sacha approached the entrance of the crystal mines, everyone was gathered and attentive. The mission entrusted by the royalty was to defeat a highly dangerous crystal golem that had appeared in the area. In front of the cave entrance, Sacha earnestly explained that the golem's body was extremely resistant, and that it would be necessary to increase the power of the attacks to break through its defenses. Then she reiterated the plan out loud to make sure everyone was lined up. They would use Crest's duplication ability, who would create a copy of herself to confuse the golem. Then, Moani would use her magic to enchant the arrows with explosive spells. Robin, the archer of the group, would shoot these enchanted arrows towards the enemy to weaken their defense. And once the golem was hit, Sacha would advance with a direct hit, trusting that everyone would cover his rear during the execution of the attack. As he spoke, the members of the group, Crest, Moni, Robin, Jace, and the other supporting adventurers, were reacting with determined expressions. Moni loudly confirmed that she was ready, Crest also claimed that he was prepared, and seeing the group so questioned, Sacha gave the signal to start the operation. Everyone went into the mine, where the crystals shone brightly, and the walls reflected the light in a magical way. Moni commented on how beautiful the place was, while Robin explained that the ore found there was of such a high quality that anyone who tried to mine it without permission would be executed without hesitation. The group moved forward cautiously, observing the intense glare of the crystals, and talking about the deeper layers where the mineral was even purer. Suddenly Sacha pointed to the front, and said that he had spotted the golem. Moni immediately asked everyone to stop, while Robin got into position. Then, a huge crystal golem emerged from the shadows, with a sturdy body made up of shiny and diamond-hard fragments, and an empty but threatening gaze. The group was now facing the main challenge of the mission. The time had come to put the plan into practice. While advancing through the main area of the mines, Robin noticed something strange in the movement of the enemies. After quickly counting, he indicated that there were 7 crystal golems in the area. However, he explained that something did not add up. 5 of them seemed to be patrolling the mining area, walking in circles, as if protecting a perimeter, while the other 2 stood guard at the back, near the processing area. Crest directly asked what Robin meant by something was wrong, and he, concentrating, replied that the movement of the golems was curiously coordinated, which was unusual for such creatures. Sacha listened to him carefully, and Jace added that golems in essence were simple monsters created from minerals and stones, which usually acted instinctively and disorganized, without any kind of consciousness. The group was silent for a moment, while he analyzed the patterns and stressed that such creatures should not be able to make strategic decisions, much less position themselves tactically. That was definitely weird. Faced with this, Crest asked Sacha what they should do about this anomaly. Sacha took a deep breath, adjusted the sword in his hand, and with conviction replied that they would stick to the original plan. Then at Sacha's command, Cresta activated her duplication ability, creating an identical copy of herself that advanced next to the original. Meanwhile, Moni quickly prepared herself and channeled explosive magic into several special arrows that she had prepared in advance. Thereupon, she shouted to Robin that she was ready, and he, with a serious expression, tensed his bow precisely and aimed at the center of the group of golems. With an exploding scream, Moni fired, and Robin, without hesitation, launched a flurry of enchanted arrows that flew at high speed in different directions. Taking advantage of the moment of confusion, Sacha advanced next to his copy to start the melee attack. The group had started executing the plan with precision, however the strange behavior of the golems still left a feeling of alertness in the environment. Even so, Sacha, determined to go ahead with the plan, advanced next to his duplicate, summoned by Crest's double ability, and with a swift and precise movement, shouted the name of his special technique, Lotus Stroke of the Silver Flash. At that instant, both versions of Sacha attacked at the same time, generating a powerful wave of energy that crossed the battlefield, breaking through the crystal golems. The force of the attack was so intense that the nearest golems were thrown far away, deep cracks appearing on their bodies. Finally, with the field cleared, Sacha declared the battle over. The others quietly celebrated, especially Maiwani, who praised Sacha's skill and was delighted with the power of the double skill. While everyone was recovering, Sacha mentioned that he felt a strange presence coming from a passage at the back of the chamber. Although it wasn't part of the original mission, Sacha argued that they couldn't just ignore the threatening aura. Therefore, he ordered everyone to stay alert, as they were going to investigate. The group followed the narrow path that led to the crystal processing area, where they were surprised by a demonic-looking young man, who was casually sitting among the crystals. He greeted her with an enigmatic smile. When Sacha asked him for his identity, he replied without hesitation that his name was Crane, and that he was a demon. Faced with such a revelation, Jace reacted with disbelief, directly asking if he had really said that he was a demon, since he knew the historical weight of that name. Next, Jace explained that after the end of the war, a powerful man had separated the continent into 2, the human kingdom and the demonic kingdom, in order to keep the demons away. According to his words, in theory, no one should be able to cross between both realms, which made Crane's presence an even greater mystery. For his part, Crane, smiling with superiority, mocked Jace's intelligence and confirmed that the demons were really dangerous, hinting that their presence there was completely deliberate. Upon hearing this, Jace immediately suggested that the group leave, aware of the risk posed by facing someone of that race. Through a panel showing ancient ruins, the group reflected on how, during the war, a few demons faced tens of thousands of humans, and yet caused immense damage, revealing how absurdly powerful they were. With a nonchalant smile, Crane then said that he would let them go for that day, and that they should thank the guy in the glasses, referring to Jace. He then revealed that he had obtained the high-purity crystals he was looking for, although he did not explain what his purpose was with them. Sacha insisted on knowing, but the demons simply replied that they would not understand, even if he explained it. Finally, Crane mocked humanity, saying that they are like insects that are always chasing treasures.